Hello, friends. Today's speaking practice will be based on a real-life story. You'll be amazed when you hear how William Kamkwamba, living in a small village without electricity, built a windmill with his own hands and changed his entire village. But in this video, you won't just listen. Pay close attention to the story and repeat the sentences with me, because repeating is one of the best ways to improve your speaking skills. At certain points, we'll ask you to make guesses and leave comments. So don't be a passive viewer. Participate and improve your English. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Your support is crucial for more content like this. Also, share your thoughts in the comments at the end of the video. Now let's get started. In a small village in Malawi, 14-year-old William Kamkwamba gazed up at the night sky. The stars shone brightly, but the houses around him were in complete darkness. There was no electricity in his village. People had to rely on kerosene lamps, which they could only afford to use on special occasions. Moving around at night was dangerous. Snakes and other wild animals could appear at any moment. William glanced at the dim candlelight inside their hut. His younger sister was trying to study, but the weak light made it almost impossible to read. His mother was cooking over an open fire, but the smoke stung her eyes because their fire had no chimney. The flame provided little light, but it filled the room with thick smoke. William took a deep breath and turned to his father. "Father, do we have to live like this? Will we always be in darkness?" he asked. His father put down the corn cob he was holding and sighed deeply. "William, we are farmers. This is our life. We work in the fields, grow our crops, and sell them at harvest time. If we are lucky, we make a little money." William frowned. "But if our village had electricity, everything would change. People could work at night. Children could study better, and we could water our crops more efficiently." His father smiled but shook his head slightly. "Son, they can do that in big cities because they have money. We cannot afford electricity." William did not want to accept this answer. He lowered his head, but a spark had ignited inside him. He knew he had to bring electricity to his village, but he had no idea how. Many questions raced through his mind. How was electricity generated? Was it possible to create it from scratch? He didn't have the answers yet, but he was determined to find them. But electricity wasn't the only problem in the village. The rainy season was too short, and the fields were drying up. With poor harvests, families were going hungry, and children were struggling to find food. If a solution wasn't found soon, the future of the entire village would be at risk. Instead of accepting this fate, William decided to take action and change things for the better. The next day, William went to the small library in his village. The shelves were filled with old, worn-out books, but one of them caught his attention: Using Energy. As he opened the book, the illustrations immediately intrigued him. On one page, there was a tall tower with spinning blades beside it. "A wind turbine," he murmured. This machine could turn the power of the wind into electricity. The librarian noticed William's astonished expression. "What did you find?" he asked. This machine. It generates electricity using the wind. If I build one in our village, everyone will have light," William said excitedly. The man smiled. "That's an interesting idea, William. But you'll need materials to build it." William nodded. A question popped into his mind. What materials do I need to make this? He carefully studied the drawings in the book. Metal pipes, bicycle parts, and a generator. Where can I find these? He wondered. That night, he shared his idea with his family. His mother smiled slightly but didn't say much. His father, however, frowned. Son, you can barely pass your school subjects. How do you expect to bring electricity to the village? William didn't give up. Father, I will work hard. If I succeed, you'll have light when you return from the fields at night. Mother will be able to see better while cooking. My sister will study under a real lamp, not a candle. His father took a deep breath and shook his head. You are free to try, but remember, this is not easy. No one in the village has ever done such a thing. As William lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he felt excited about what he had learned that day. But one question still remained in his mind. What materials could he use to make this project a reality? William woke up early in the morning and got straight to work. He started searching all over the village for materials he could use. His first stop was the scrap pile. There he found old bicycle wheels, metal pipes, and some rusty screws. These might come in handy, he murmured. But he was still missing the most important part, a generator. Just then, he remembered Mr. Mfatso, the village mechanic. His shop might have old motor parts. Without wasting time, he ran there. When he opened the door, Mr. Mfatso looked at him in surprise. William, what are you looking for so early in the morning? He asked. Breathing heavily, William said, Mr. Mfatso, I need an old generator. I want to bring electricity to our village. Mr. Mfatso raised an eyebrow. Electricity? That's quite a big dream, young man, he said with a smile. But I might have an old radio generator. I'm not sure if it still works, though. Excited, William pleaded, Please, Mr. Mfatso, let me try it. Shaking his head, the man brought out an old generator from the back of his shop. William thanked him and set off again to gather the rest of the materials. But soon, some kids in the village noticed him. Hey, William, what are you doing? One of his friends asked. Proudly holding up the parts in his hands, William replied, I'm building a wind turbine. I'm going to bring electricity to our village. However, one of the kids burst into laughter. You? Ha ha ha. You need an engineer for that. Get out of your dream world, he mocked. For a moment, William hesitated. What if it really was impossible? What if he failed? But then, he listened to the voice inside him. You won't know unless you try. Now a question for you. If you were in William's place, how would you respond to those who laughed at you? And another question. Do you think Mr. Mfatso's generator will work? Share your predictions. As William walked home, a mix of excitement and fear swirled inside him. He had gathered the materials, but now came the hardest part, building the turbine. Would it really work? William carried all the parts he had gathered to his father's old storage shed. He placed a sheet of paper in front of him and tried to recall the physics lessons he had learned from his teacher. The wind will turn the blades. The kinetic energy will be transferred to the generator and electricity will be produced. Everything seemed perfect in theory. But what about in practice? His father was watching him. Son, this might be difficult. Do you really believe you can do it? He asked. William looked up. I won't know until I try, Dad. But if I succeed, our whole village will have light, he said with determination. His father smiled slightly. Well, then give it a try. First, William used a bicycle wheel to create a wind turbine blade. He attached it to a metal rod. Then, he connected the generator he had gotten from Mr. Mfatso. He wired everything together and set it up. Now there was nothing left to do but wait for the wind to blow. A few hours later, a gentle breeze began to blow. William and his father watched with excitement. The turbine blades started spinning. Would the light bulb at the end of the generator glow? But nothing happened. William quickly checked the connections. He rewired them and tried again. Still nothing. His father looked at him. "Sometimes things don't work on the first try, son. But that doesn't mean you should give up." However, William felt discouraged. He held his head in his hands and thought, maybe my friends were right. Now, here's a question for you. What should William do next? If you were in his place, would you keep trying or give up? And another question. Why do you think the turbine didn't work? Where could the mistake be? Share your thoughts. That night, William couldn't sleep. Questions kept swirling in his mind. What did I do wrong? He wondered. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to give up. William spent the entire night scribbling in his notebook. He must have made a mistake. But where? At some point he dozed off, but the moment he opened his eyes in the morning, an idea struck him. The connections, he whispered to himself. I might have wired it incorrectly. He immediately got to work. He reopened the generator and checked the wires. Sure enough, some of the connections were wrong. Excitedly, he reviewed his notes and started making corrections. Just then, his friend Gilbert showed up. William, you weren't at school yesterday. Everyone thinks you've given up on this silly windmill project, he said. William looked up and smiled. Give up? Never. On the contrary, I found my mistake, and now I'm fixing it, he said with determination. Gilbert narrowed his eyes. Do you really think this will work? William shrugged. There's only one way to find out. Meanwhile, his father had been watching everything. He nodded slightly and thought to himself, this boy is really something else. William and Gilbert waited for the wind to blow. As a gentle breeze began to stir, the blades slowly started turning. Would the generator work this time? A brief moment of silence. And then, the bulb lit up. William and Gilbert stared at each other in shock. His father burst into laughter, cheering, William, you did it! William blinked in disbelief. Was this tiny light the result of all his weeks of effort? When William saw the light bulb glow, a wave of joy filled his heart. But it wasn't enough. If he truly wanted to help his village, light alone wouldn't solve their problems. The biggest issue was the dry, barren fields caused by the lack of water. If he could use his windmill to power a water pump, the fields could become green again. The next morning, he took his father's old irrigation pump and started connecting it to the windmill. Villagers gathered around, watching him with curiosity. Most still didn't believe he would succeed, but William was confident. Gilbert asked excitedly, Do you really think it will pump water? William smiled. We won't know until we try, right? He made the final connections and took a deep breath. Now all he had to do was wait for the wind. A gentle breeze blew. The windmill began to spin. And then, water. As the first drop trickled from the pump and hit the dry soil, the villagers gasped in amazement. The once barren land was finally touching water. Women and children cheered with joy. Gilbert dipped his hand into the flowing water and splashed it onto his face. William, this is amazing. You did it, he shouted. At that moment, William's father quietly approached him. His eyes were filled with emotion. I was wrong, son, he whispered. Then, wrapping his strong arms around William, he hugged him tightly. William hugged his father back. For the first time in his life, he truly felt his father's pride. And so, the village's fields were irrigated once again. Green seedlings began to sprout, bringing life back to the land. The villagers no longer saw William as a crazy dreamer. They now saw him as an inventor.